Boone didn't resist when the cage door opened. The staff handed Leah a pair of thick gloves and a catchpole, but she shook her head gently. She had a way with animals, one that didn't start with fear. She took a deep breath and slowly approached the young bobcat. He stood on unsteady legs, his body thin but still dignified. His golden eyes never left hers as she quietly knelt down. There was no aggression, just confusion, and perhaps, deep down, the flicker of hope. "I know you don't understand," she said softly, "but you're not going to die here." She opened the crate and gave him space. It took nearly 20 minutes, but Boone finally stepped forward. He looked back once at the cage that had held him his entire life, then walked into the crate without a sound. The staff didn't say much as she signed the release form. One of them muttered, "Not many people drive across states for a cat with no future." Leah just smiled, closed the crate door, and carried Boone to the truck. She placed him gently in the back seat and wrapped a blanket around the carrier to keep him calm. The sun had just started to rise as she pulled out of the gravel lot and onto the open highway. Boone didn't make a sound during the ride. For nearly 12 hours, he sat quietly, watching the world fly past through the small openings in the crate. He didn't growl or paw. Every time Leah stopped for gas, she checked on him. He just stared back, alert but calm. It was as if he knew something better had begun. When they finally reached Leah's sanctuary, the sky had turned a soft orange. The property was peaceful, surrounded by trees and quiet trails. Birds chirped overhead. A few foxes peeked from their enclosures, curious about the newcomer. Leah opened the truck and gently lifted Boone's crate. She carried him to a shaded pen she had prepared with fresh hay, logs for climbing, and real space. Boone blinked as she opened the crate door. He took a tentative step out, then paused. Leah didn't rush him. She sat nearby, giving him time to take in the new sights and smells. He sniffed the air, crouched low, and then crept into the enclosure with the cautious grace of a predator long out of practice. He didn't run, he didn't hide. Instead, he walked to the far corner, circled a few times, and lay down beneath a patch of sunlight. Leah watched in silence, her heart thudding in her chest. This was only the beginning, and she knew the road ahead would be uncertain. Boone had never lived outside a cage. He didn't know how to survive in the wild, and he might never be able to. But in that moment, watching him stretch his limbs for the first time in a place where no one would hurt him, Leah believed something important. Boone had a story worth saving. Boone's first night at the sanctuary passed quietly. Leah checked on him every few hours, but he barely moved. He lay beneath the shaded corner of his new enclosure, eyes open, watching the stars through the wire ceiling. There was no pacing, no growling, only stillness, as if he was trying to decide whether this place was real. Leah didn't sleep much either. Her mind kept replaying the way Boone had looked at her through the cage door, back at the facility, curious, trusting, and strangely calm for a wild animal. She had rescued many creatures over the years, but something about this bobcat felt different. He had the body of a predator but the spirit of something wounded. The next morning, she brewed coffee and took it outside with her, walking slowly toward Boone's enclosure. He was awake, sitting up, eyes fixed on her. He didn't flinch as she approached. She stopped several feet from the fence and sat cross-legged in the grass. "Morning, Boone," she said gently. "You made it." She tossed a chunk of raw chicken into the pen. Boone sniffed it, nudged it with his nose, then ate slowly. He didn't tear into it like most wild cats. He ate with control, never taking his eyes off her. Later that day, Leah sat down at her computer and began documenting Boone's arrival. She uploaded the first photo she had taken. Boone curled in the corner of the transport crate, eyes wide but calm. She added a caption, "Rescued from death row. Meet Boone." Within an hour, the post began to spread. Wildlife lovers, rescue workers, and sanctuary volunteers started sharing the image. Some left comments with heart emojis, others asked questions, but one message stopped Leah cold. It came from a retired wildlife biologist named Dr. Karen Miles, who had spent decades studying bobcat behavior. Her message read, "I've only seen that posture in one type of animal, a socialized one. Are you sure he's fully wild?" Leah reread the message twice. She had assumed Boone was like all the other wild animals she'd rescued, afraid of humans, unpredictable, solitary. But what if he wasn't? Curious, she set up a camera outside his enclosure. For the next few days, she observed everything Boone did. He didn't act like a wild bobcat. He didn't avoid her. He didn't hiss when she approached the fence. In fact, by the third morning, he was waiting at the front of the enclosure when she walked outside. And then it happened. Leah was placing a fresh bowl of water near the gate when her dog Willow, a calm and gentle shepherd mix, wandered over. Willow sniffed the air and tilted her head. Boone, instead of retreating or reacting, simply sat and watched. No growling, no stalking. The two animals stared at each other through the fence, completely still, completely calm. Leah couldn't believe it. In all her years of working with wildlife, she had never seen a bobcat so relaxed around a dog. That evening, she reviewed the footage from the camera and saw something even more surprising. Boone had walked alongside the fence line when she left, pacing just a few steps behind her shadow. He wasn't following out of fear. He was following out of connection. Picked up the phone and called Dr. Miles. "I think you might be right," Leah said. "He's different." Dr. Miles paused before answering. "Some animals bond with people early, and it never leaves them. If he was taken as a kitten and hand-raised, he might see you as part of his world. Not prey, not a threat, just someone." That night, Leah sat outside Boone's enclosure as the sun dipped low behind the hills. He came to the fence and lay down a few feet away from her. They didn't touch, didn't move, but there was something in the silence, something unspoken, but deeply understood. Leah looked at the bobcat through the fading light and whispered, "What happened to you, Boone?" He blinked slowly, and in that moment, she realized this journey wasn't just about saving an animal, it was about uncovering the truth behind those eyes and rewriting a life that had once been forgotten. Leah had taken a lot of road trips for rescues before rushing to pick up injured owls. Driving across counties to relocate Fox Kitsput, the 700-mile trip to bring Boone home, had been unlike any of them. It wasn't just the distance, it was the feeling in her gut that she was racing against time to save something more than just a life. She was saving a story that had nearly ended before anyone had even heard it. Back in her small farmhouse sanctuary, Boone was starting to show sides of himself she hadn't expected. He didn't hide from the sounds of her voice or flinch when she moved near the fence. He began pacing the edge of the enclosure every morning, not in distress, but as if waiting for her to appear. And each time she did, he would stop, sit, and watch her intently. But Leah couldn't shake the memories from that long drive. The beginning of it had been filled with adrenaline. She had arrived at the roadside facility, exhausted and running on determination. The place had smelled of rust and neglect. Some of the enclosures looked more like old storage cages than homes for animals. She hadn't stayed long after signing the papers. She just wanted to get Boone out. Once she got on the road with him, the mood shifted. The sun climbed higher as the highway opened before them. The hum of the tires, the rhythm of the journey, it all felt strange. Every now and then, Leah glanced at the crate in the back seat. Boone wasn't panting or growling. He just sat silently, watching the trees blur by. At one point, she pulled over into a shaded rest stop. She opened the back door, unlatched the crate slightly, and crouched beside it. Boone didn't make a move to escape. He just looked at her, calm and curious. "You're something else," she whispered. He blinked slowly, and for a brief moment, Leah felt as though she were in the presence of something not just wild, but wise. Back at the sanctuary, Boone was now exploring his new space. Leah had added logs, pine branches, and even a hanging rope toy she wasn't sure he'd touch. But Boone surprised her again. One afternoon, she caught him swatting at it gently, then pulling it toward him like a kitten would with a ball of yarn. That same night, she brought a camp chair out and sat by the enclosure under a sky full of stars. Boone walked toward her slowly, then lay down just a few feet away on the other side of the fence. Leah watched him breathe, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the sounds of crickets and wind. She thought about how close he'd come to dying in that rusted cage. She thought about how easily he could have disappeared into a system where animals like him were considered too much trouble to save. But here he was now alive, curious and gentle in ways no one had expected. The next morning, Leah called the vet to schedule a full checkup. She needed to know what Boone had been through, what scars he might be carrying both on the inside and the outside. Dr. Morrison arrived 2 days later, carrying his portable kit and a curious expression. "You're sure he's not dangerous?" he asked, peering through the fence. "He hasn't shown one sign of aggression," Leah replied, "not even a hiss." The vet entered the enclosure with caution, but Boone didn't move. He let the vet get close enough to use a long syringe pole for sedation, then rested peacefully as he drifted to sleep. The exam revealed the truth. Boone had healed broken ribs, likely from a fall or abuse, and marks on his front paws from years of pacing on concrete. But overall, he was healthy, underweight, yes, but resilient. Dr. Morrison shook his head in disbelief. I don't know who raised this cat, but he's no ordinary bobcat. Leah nodded. I think someone loved him once, then left him behind. And that, more than anything, made her heart ache, because Boone wasn't just surviving now. He was starting to remember what it meant to feel safe again. The first time Boone touched grass, he flinched. His paws sank slightly into the soft earth, a sensation he had likely never experienced before. For a moment, he froze completely. Leah stood outside the enclosure, holding her breath. She had spent days preparing the space with natural elements logs to climb. Patches of grass, shaded corners, and fresh-smelling pine branches. It was designed to give him something close to what nature might have offered. If life had been different, Boone took a second cautious step, then another. He moved like an animal trying to remember something buried deep in instinct. His muscles stretched with each stride, a bit uncertain at first, but growing stronger. When he reached the edge of the enclosure where a branch hung, just above him, he looked at it for a long while before gently swiping it with his paw. Leah smiled quietly from her spot by the fence. There you go, she whispered. That's yours now. Each day brought something new. On the second morning, Boone rolled in the dirt. On the third, he climbed halfway up a tree stump and stretched his limbs wide. By the end of the week, he had claimed every corner of the enclosure. He especially liked the top platform where he could lie in the sun and watch birds fly overhead. Despite all this progress, Leah noticed something different about Boone, something no amount of climbing, space could explain. He was watching her more than he was watching the sky. Every time she walked outside, he tracked her with his eyes, not in the way a wild animal tracks prey, but with something closer to recognition. He waited near the fence line when he heard her voice. When she left his sight, he would walk along the edge of the enclosure until she returned. Leah had worked with many animals over the years, but this was new. Boone was clearly wild, yet he didn't act like a bobcat raised without human contact. He didn't show fear or aggression. In fact, he seemed drawn to her presence. One evening, she decided to test his comfort level. She placed a lawn chair just outside the enclosure and brought a book with her. Boone approached and lay down a few feet away on the other side of the fence. She began to read aloud in a calm, steady voice. For the next hour, Boone didn't move. He just lay there, ears forward, eyes blinking slowly, tail curled beside him. The next day, Leah introduced something new, a thick rope tied from one tree post to another. It swayed gently in the breeze, inviting and playful. She watched from a distance, wondering if he would take interest. Boone stared at the rope for a long time, then slowly rose and padded toward it. With one gentle leap, he jumped and clung to it, hanging for a moment before dropping back to the ground. It wasn't graceful, but it was progress. Leah clapped quietly from the other side of the enclosure. You're getting stronger, Boone. But physical healing wasn't the only transformation happening. Leah began to post daily updates, online pictures and short videos of Boone exploring, resting, or simply watching the world go by. Her followers grew fast. People were fascinated by the quiet strength of the rescued bobcat. Comments poured in. He looks so calm. That stare, he's thinking deeply. You saved more than his life. You saved his spirit. One morning, a woman messaged Leah privately with an old photo. It showed a much younger bobcat, maybe just a few months old, sitting beside a child. The message read, "Is this Boone? We had to surrender him years ago. I never forgave myself." Leah stared at the photo. The kitten's eyes were unmistakable. Boone had once been someone's companion. He wasn't just a bobcat raised in captivity, had been raised with affection, maybe even love. And now, slowly and carefully, he was learning to trust again. But Leah knew something else. This wasn't just healing. This was the beginning of something even more extraordinary. Boone had lived at the sanctuary for almost a month, and by now, his days had developed a quiet rhythm. Each morning, he would wake before sunrise and sit at the edge of the enclosure, watching the light crawl across the ground. Leah often found him there, still and alert, as if waiting for the world to begin. The changes in him were becoming impossible to ignore. Boone was no longer thin or fragile. His coat had regained its shine, his muscles had firmed, and he moved with a quiet grace that left visitors in awe. But it wasn't just his physical health that had changed. It was the way he looked at Leia, the way he chose to be near her, that revealed something deeper. One morning, while Leia was replacing the straw in a nearby fox enclosure, Boone let out a short, low chirp from behind the fence. She paused, surprised. Bobcats could vocalize, but it was rare to hear a sound like that, especially one so soft and purposeful. She turned to look, and there he was, standing at the corner closest to her, tail twitching gently. "Hey Boone," she said, walking closer. He chirped again. That day, she began sitting just inside the double-gated entrance to his enclosure, still cautious but willing to test their bond. Boone approached slowly, his paws barely making a sound. He didn't show fear, just curiosity. He sniffed the air near her, then turned and lay down beside her at a distance that was respectful, but close enough to feel intentional. Leia didn't move. She didn't have to. Boone had made his choice. As the days passed, their silent visits became part of the daily routine. Boone would wait for her after breakfast. Sometimes he would bring over a pine cone and drop it nearby. Sometimes he'd simply rest near her feet as she read a book or softly spoke to him. But Leia knew there were limits. Boone was still a wild animal by nature, and legally, he was classified as non-releasable wildlife. If she were to keep him outside, he'd need to remain in the enclosure under strict guidelines. Yet everything in Boone's behavior was telling her something else. He didn't want to stay behind the fence. He was seeking connection. Leia began to wonder, was Boone still wild? She reached out to Dr. Miles again and shared a few of the recent videos. Boone bringing toys, lying belly up in her presence, even dozing off within arm's reach. After a long pause, Dr. Miles said, "That's not just tolerance, that's trust. He's bonded with you in a way most wildcats never do." Leia asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. Could he ever live inside, even part-time? There was another pause. "It's rare," the biologist said. "But in cases like his, where a bobcat is imprinted young and shows strong social behavior, it can happen. But you'd need a permit, special clearances, and a space built just for him. He's not a pet, Leia. He's something in between. Something in between." That phrase stuck in her mind. Leia began researching. She called the local wildlife authority, explained Boone's history, and requested a site inspection. She spent hours reviewing housing requirements for captive wildlife and modifying her home to meet those standards. A secure sunroom was transformed into a bobcat safe haven, reinforced windows, natural climbing posts, and a locked entry. The process was long and expensive, but Leia never hesitated. During the renovations, Boone watched from his enclosure. When she left the house carrying tools or wood, he followed her along the fence line. When she disappeared indoors, he waited near the gate. He was ready. The day the permit finally arrived, Leia stood at Boone's enclosure holding the document in her hand, heart pounding. The gate opened, and Boone stepped out, not with fear or confusion, but calm confidence. Inside the house, he explored quietly, paws padding against the wooden floor. He sniffed the furniture, glanced at the windows, then without hesitation, leaped onto the couch and curled into a ball dot, as if it had always been his. The moment Boone curled up on the couch, Leia felt something shift, not just in the room, but in the story they were living together. It had taken paperwork, inspections, letters of support, and months of observation to convince the authorities that this wasn't just a wild animal being brought into a home. It was a once domesticated bobcat seeking a second chance at life in the woods. But beside someone who understood him, Boone didn't hesitate to make himself comfortable. Within an hour, he had stretched out along the back of the couch, his spotted fur blending almost comically with the throw blanket Leia had placed there. When the ceiling fan hummed above, his ears flicked, but he didn't budge. He blinked slowly, relaxed. It was as if the house had always belonged to him. Leia kept her distance that first day, observing quietly as Boone explored. She had closed off most of the house except the sunroom, kitchen, and main living space. Everything had been bobcat-proofed. No exposed cords, no breakables, plenty of climbing spots, and large windows for sunlight. Boone explored each area deliberately. He sniffed a potted plant, pawed at a hanging tapestry, then leaped onto a platform by the window and sat motionless, staring outside. He was calm, but alert, comfortable, but aware. That evening, Leah sat down with a mug of tea and opened her laptop. The video of Boone entering the house for the first time had already reached thousands online. People around the world were following his story closely, cheering him on with every update. One comment read, "It's hard to believe that's the same animal from the cage photo." Another, "He looks like he's finally home," but not everyone understood. Leah received cautious messages from strangers wondering if Boone would remain safe or if he could become unpredictable. She answered each message honestly. Boone wasn't a pet. He was a rescued soul, and every decision she made was grounded in respect, preparation, and understanding of what he needed. The next few days were full of small, surprising moments. Boone began rubbing against the corner of the couch, marking it as his own. He discovered a basket of fleece blankets and pulled one into a sunbeam to nap on. He figured out how to open the sliding door to the sunroom and would slip in quietly for afternoon rests among the ferns. And then came the moment that told Leah everything she needed to know. It was a rainy afternoon. Thunder rolled softly through the hills. Boone had never liked the sound of storms, not in the enclosure, not even in the transport crate during his rescue. But now, as the wind howled and rain tapped the windows, he didn't pace or hide. Instead, he walked calmly into the living room, leapt onto the couch beside Leah, and curled against her legs. She froze for a moment, unsure if it was real, but Boone didn't move. He closed his eyes and rested his head gently on her knee. For the first time, Leah allowed herself to believe that this wasn't temporary. Boone wasn't just passing through, he was choosing this life with her. That night, she brought out an old journal she kept for her most meaningful rescues. Under Boone's name, she wrote, "He is still a bobcat, still wild in his bones, but there's something more in him, something open, something deeply kind," and against all odds, he chose to trust again. As the storm rolled on outside, Boone stayed curled beside her, his breathing slow and steady. Leah leaned back into the cushions and listened to the quiet rhythm of a life once forgotten, now beginning again. By the third week in the house, Boone had completely claimed his territory. The wild animal that had once trembled behind metal bars was now a graceful shadow, moving through rooms with quiet confidence. He had favorite spots: a thick blanket in the sunroom, the top of the bookshelf by the window, and of course, the couch, which he now considered his personal throne. Leah woke up one morning to find that Boone had pulled every pillow onto the floor and arranged them into a soft nest. Near the back door, he lay in the center of them, paws tucked under, looking both regal and ridiculous. When she chuckled, Boone flicked his tail as if to say, "Yes, I did that, and yes, I plan to do it again." What amazed Leah wasn't just how quickly he had adapted, it was how selectively he behaved. Boone never scratched the furniture, never lunged or bit. He was curious but careful, as if he understood the rules of this new world. When guests came, he watched them from a distance, but never showed aggression. And when Leah sat quietly in the living room, Boone would often come and rest beside her, eyes half-lidded, purring faintly, like a house cat that had been trained from birth. But make no mistake, he was still a bobcat. There were bursts of wildness that reminded Leah of his untamed roots. Some mornings, Boone would dart through the hall at full speed, leaping over furniture and skidding around corners, his instincts firing like a lightning strike. He would freeze mid-pounce at shadows on the wall or stalk a fluttering moth with pinpoint focus. To channel his energy, Leah added a large jungle gym-style setup in the sunroom, made from reclaimed wood, thick rope, and natural climbing structures. It gave Boone a space to leap, claw, and stretch like he would in the wild. He adored it. Every morning, he would climb to the highest point and look out the window, watching birds, clouds, and sometimes deer in the distance. Leah continued to document his days on social media, and soon, Boone had a following. Thousands of people tuned in to watch Boone's daily life, where he was seen snoozing on a stack of laundry, pawing at a ceiling fan cord, or sneaking treats from Leah's coat pocket. One video, in particular, went viral. It showed Boone sneaking into the kitchen while Leah was cooking, reaching up with one paw to gently tug at the corner of her sleeve. When she turned, he dropped a crumpled piece of paper at her feet, one she had thrown into the recycling bin minutes earlier. The caption read, "Apparently Boone recycles now." It racked up millions of views. People were enchanted by him. They sent fan art, hand-sewn toys, and even custom name tags made of polished wood. Some wrote long messages saying Boone's story gave them hope that if a bobcat could come back from a cage to find peace, maybe they could too. Leah read every message aloud to Boone as he lounged on the couch. Whether he understood or not, she believed he felt something in the warmth of her voice. One evening, after a long day of filming an interview with a local animal rescue network, Leah sat down on the floor and leaned against the couch. Boone stepped down from his perch and sat beside her. Not on her lap, not quite, but close enough that his side touched her shoulder. They stayed that way until the sun dipped behind the trees. It was then that Leah understood something simple and profound. Boone had not become tame. He had become safe. There was still wildness in him, still sparks of the predator he was born to be, but now that wildness was wrapped in trust, in calm, in the quiet miracle of a second chance. And for the first time in his life, Boone wasn't just surviving, he was loved. Boone had been with Leah for nearly a year when the local news station returned to do a follow-up story. The first time they had come, Boone had stayed tucked away, curious but hesitant. This time, he was lounging on his favorite perch in the sunroom, lazily flicking his tail while the reporter filmed from a respectful distance. The light from the windows spilled across his golden fur, highlighting the subtle strength in his relaxed body. Leah stood nearby, answering questions while keeping one eye on Boone, though by now, she didn't need to worry. He was calm, aware, and most importantly, he had claimed his place in the home, not by force or demand, but by quiet belonging. As the interview wrapped, the reporter asked, "Do you think Boone understands how close he came to being lost?" Leah smiled, glancing at the bobcat, who now stretched and yawned dramatically. "Maybe not in the way we understand it," she said, "but I think he knows he's safe now, and that he matters." After they left, Leah sat beside Boone's climbing platform and offered him a piece of raw chicken, his favorite treat. He took it gently, without a sound, and rested his chin on the edge of the platform, watching her with those familiar golden eyes. In the months that followed, Boone's story spread even farther. Animal sanctuaries from around the country reached out to learn more about his care. Children wrote school essays about him. A documentary filmmaker contacted Leah with interest in telling Boone's story as part of a series on rescued animals. But Leah never let the attention distract from what really mattered: Boone's well-being. Each morning, she greeted him as if it were the first day. Some days, he would rub against her legs and follow her from room to room. Other times, he preferred solitude, curling up in his window perch to watch the world in silence. She respected both moods equally. Boone wasn't hers to control. He was hers to protect. One evening, a powerful windstorm swept across the hill country, knocking out power and rattling windows. Leah lit candles, checked the doors, and secured the animals outside. When she returned to the living room, she found Boone curled up on the couch with one of her sweatshirts under his paw, as if anchoring himself to her presence. She sat beside him, wrapping a blanket around her legs, and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." Boone didn't move. He didn't need to. His steady breathing was enough. That night, Leah looked around the quiet room and reflected on how far they had come. Boone had been moments from death in a cage, too small to stretch, in a place without sunlight or kindness. He had no name, no story anyone cared to hear. And yet, here he was now known, respected, and loved. She reached for the journal she had kept through every step of his journey, and opened it to the final page. With careful handwriting, she wrote, "Boone has taught me more than I ever expected. About patience, about wildness, about the space between fear and trust. He's not just a rescue story. He's proof that no life is too broken, no soul too wild, to be seen." As spring arrived, Boone took to lying outside on the screened porch, where he could feel the breeze and smell the earth. He would listen to birdsong and flick his ears toward distant rustles in the grass. Sometimes, Leah sat beside him, sipping coffee in the morning light, the two of them wrapped in a kind of quiet understanding that didn't need words. And when visitors came to the sanctuary and asked, "Is that really a bobcat on the couch?" Leah would smile and nod, yes, and he almost never got the chance to be here, because Boone wasn't supposed to live this long. He wasn't supposed to be anything more than a forgotten file, a short note on a cage door. But now, he was a symbol of everything that happens when one person says, "Not yet, not this one." And that decision made in one desperate moment gave the world a story of second chances, soft couches, and a bobcat who learned to live again.